Everyone thinks I stole $95 million. The shareholders, the media, and especially the silk-suited CEO who fired me via text at 2 in the morning. They all screamed it to the police. But the truth about where that money went is far more ruthless and karmic than any bank heist. If you want to know how I brought down a fintech empire without typing one malicious line of code, grab a coffee. The real show starts now. Hello to our amazing audience at Boss Revenge Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continued support over the years. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and shift our entire focus over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon family, where you will find even better, longer, and more detailed, exclusive true stories that we cannot make public on YouTube, fully produced with multiple emotional voice actors. You can join us right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's tale, the story of Ella Wood. I was 36 years old, a pragmatic woman originally from Ohio, working as the Director of Transaction Risk Management at Meridian Vault. Meridian Vault was a heavily hyped fintech firm nestled in the shiny, sprawling tech hub of Viridian Hills, Texas. On paper, we were revolutionaries, specializing in routing massive, complex cash flows for heavyweight commercial real estate funds. If you walked through our front doors, you would be blinded by the polished glass, the designer beanbag chairs, the organic kombucha on tap, and the endless smiles of aggressive ambition. But if you looked closer, past the shiny veneer, you would see the rot. Being in your mid-30s in a tech startup feels like being a ghost. You are surrounded by 20-somethings who run on pure adrenaline and blind arrogance, while you are the one quietly keeping the building from catching fire. Under the harsh, sterile glare of fluorescent lights at midnight, the corporate illusion always strips itself bare. I was the silent janitor of Meridian Vault, while Bryce, our 32-year-old CEO, spent his afternoons wearing silk blend vests and going on popular tech podcasts to brag about our disruptive startup culture. I spent my nights drinking stale coffee and frantically patching lethal security holes. Our entire cash routing system was a Frankenstein monster of dangerously outdated legacy code, barely held together by digital duct tape and my relentless overtime. The suffocating pressure finally reached a boiling point when whispers of a massive corporate buyout turned into a concrete, multi-billion-dollar acquisition offer. Bryce and his board of yes-men could already taste their massive stock payouts. They grew frantic to dress up the quarterly financial reports, to make the company look like an unstoppable money printing machine. Their golden ticket was a $95 million escrow deposit from our biggest client. Bryce and the executive board wanted that massive chunk of money fully processed, routed, and cleared by Friday to instantly inflate our valuation before the weekend auditors arrived. There was only one massive problem: the federal law. I repeatedly warned them, standing in a boardroom filled with men who looked at me like an annoying speed bump. You simply cannot forcefully expedite $95 million through our fragile legacy system without tripping a mountain of federal anti-money laundering protocols. The system required a strict series of compliance checks, mandatory holding periods, and my personal, encrypted digital signature to authorize an override for anything over $10 million. I flatly refused to bypass the security framework. It is a severe federal violation, Bryce, and I will not sign my name to a felony, I told him, looking dead into his eyes. The retaliation was swift, silent, and surgical. By Monday of that week, my corporate calendar mysteriously emptied out. I was suddenly locked out of executive briefings and ignored in the hallways. On Wednesday afternoon, Chloe, our director of human resources, cornered me near the break room. Chloe had a terrifyingly perfect smile and the emotional depth of a spreadsheet. "Ella, the board feels you are being a bit too rigid with your compliance standards lately," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet corporate empathy. "We are moving fast. We really need team players who understand the bigger picture and do not stand in the way of progress. I did not argue. I just walked back to my desk. I knew exactly what the bigger picture meant. Fast forward to Thursday morning. The digital clock on my second monitor read 1:45 in the morning. I was the only soul left on my floor. My eyes burned violently from the sickly blue glare of the screens, and my lower back ached with the deep, exhausting physical toll of working 80-hour weeks for a company that fundamentally despised me. I was running on empty, but I had just finished executing the final system backup. I documented everything. I ensured every single file, log, and security protocol was perfectly aligned with professional ethics and federal guidelines. I did my job perfectly, just like I always did, even when they punished me for it. I packed my bag, turned off the overhead light, and drove home through the empty Texas streets. I was barely out of my work clothes when it happened. At exactly 2 in the morning, my phone screen lit up on my nightstand, cutting through the darkness of my bedroom. It was not a phone call from Bryce demanding I come back to the office. It was not even a formal email from the HR department. It was an automated, cowardly text message generated straight from our payroll software. Your position no longer aligns with our restructuring vision. Access will be revoked at 8 a.m. My belongings will be FedExed. I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the glowing words. After dedicating 5 years of my life, my health, and my sanity to keeping Bryce out of federal prison, I was discarded via an automated text message in the middle of the night. There was no sudden outburst of rage. There was no dramatic crying. The silence in the room was absolute. I stared at the harsh light of the screen, and slowly, a cold, genuine smile spread across my face. I did not type a reply. I reached out, quietly plugged my phone into the charger, and crawled into bed. I closed my eyes and fell into the absolute deepest, most profoundly peaceful sleep I have had in 5 long years. I slept so well because I knew the architecture of their rotting system better than I knew my own heartbeat. I knew exactly what those arrogant fools were going to do on Friday morning to get their money, and I knew exactly how that fragile automated routing system would react when it tried to blindly force $95 million through international banking gates, completely alone, without my encrypted safety authentication code to hold its hand. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the invisible digital cord tethering me to Meridian Vault was severed. Somewhere in a sterile server room across town, an automated script ran. My credentials evaporated, and I officially ceased to exist in their network. Usually, my Friday mornings were a chaotic blur of gulping down lukewarm coffee, shouting over conference calls, and staring at complex routing dashboards until my vision blurred. But today, the silence was exquisite. I woke up naturally, without the shrill panic of an alarm. The Texas sun was filtering softly through my blinds, casting warm, lazy shadows across the hardwood floor. I took my time. I boiled fresh water and steeped a pot of ridiculously expensive Earl Grey tea. Watching the steam rise in the quiet kitchen, I actually went for a long, unhurried walk in the local park, listening to the birds and feeling the morning breeze. These were simple, human things I had not experienced on a weekday in half a decade. While I was admiring the oak trees, the atmosphere at the corporate headquarters was vibrating with toxic, misplaced triumph. Bryce had assembled his newly promoted technology team in the main glass-walled conference room. These were the guys he loved. Slick, fast-talking developers who worshiped disruptive startup theory, but had never actually spent a single night in the trenches fixing broken databases. They were high-fiving over organic green smoothies, treating the $95 million escrow transfer like a premature victory lap. To them, the upcoming multi-billion-dollar merger was a done deal, and bypassing the federal compliance protocols was just a minor administrative shortcut. The digital guillotine dropped at exactly 15 minutes past 10 in the morning. Bryce, wanting to maintain total plausible deniability, just in case a federal auditor ever came knocking, did not press the execution key himself. Instead, he instructed a 22-year-old unpaid intern to initiate the massive routing sequence. The kid, probably thrilled to be part of the big leagues, clicked confirm. The command shot through the central network, a digital freight train carrying $95 million, barreling straight toward the international clearing gates. But the system hit an immediate, invisible wall. Before the funds could cross the threshold, the core framework automatically paused. Searching the directory for the mandatory digital risk authorization signature, it was looking for my encrypted key. The system queried the active user directory, scanning for my administrative profile. It found nothing. I was deleted. In a properly functioning financial institution, this is the exact moment massive red klaxons would blare, sirens would sound, screens would lock, and automated fail-safes would instantly freeze the transaction, returning the funds to the origin account while pinging every executive dashboard with critical error alerts. But there were no alerts. A week prior, in his absolute obsession with keeping the executive tracking boards looking flawlessly green and healthy for the prospective buyers, Bryce had explicitly ordered the engineering team to suppress all routing warnings. He wanted the user interface spotless. So, when the system failed to find my signature, it was gagged. It could not trigger an error message. It could not warn anyone. Instead, blinded and confused, the archaic fallback algorithm from the original legacy code woke up, lacking the proper clearance to move the money forward to the destination, and lacking the error reporting permission to send it back to the client. The automated system did the only thing its panicked, decades-old logic allowed it to do. It quietly diverted the entire massive payload into a digital holding pattern. Down in the Viridian Hills business district, they were completely blind to the ghost in their machine. They thought the money was happily on its way. I was sitting outside a small, sunlit cafe, slicing into a warm butter croissant, when my phone buzzed on the iron table. I glanced down. It was a text message from a junior analyst who sat 2 desks down from my old office. "Hey, sorry to bother you on your day off, but do you remember the guest Wi-Fi password for the second floor? The router is acting weird." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, feeling the warm ceramic against my palms. I looked up at the clear blue sky and let out a soft chuckle. They were worried about the guest Wi-Fi. The digital time bomb had already detonated in their basement. The countdown clock was rapidly approaching 0, and those absolute fools did not even smell the smoke yet. At exactly 11:30 in the morning, the polished illusion of absolute control finally cracked. The senior partners from the receiving firm dialed directly into the main executive suite. Their tone was no longer collegiate or friendly. It was cold, corporate, and incredibly impatient. The escrow account, they noted, was completely empty. Bryce took the call on speakerphone in the glass-walled boardroom, leaning far back in his ergonomic leather chair, projecting the aura of an untouchable Silicon Valley visionary. He let out a dismissive, arrogant laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "Just a minor bottleneck in the federal banking network," he assured them, his voice dripping with an effortless, false confidence. "These massive corporate wires always take a second to clear the international gateways. Give it half an hour, gentlemen. The funds will settle." He terminated the call. He did not bother to check the transaction logs. He did not call the engineering department. He just adjusted his custom silk vest, took a sip of his green smoothie, and went back to daydreaming about his upcoming massive stock payout. By 12 o'clock noon, the polite corporate tone was entirely gone. The reality of the situation hit the floor like a physical shockwave. The chief accountant, a highly strung man with a history of stress-induced ulcers, ran a manual trace on the central company ledger. His face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. The $95 million was not sitting peacefully at the destination bank, but far more terrifyingly, it had not bounced back into the Meridian Vault corporate reserve accounts. It was just gone, sucked into a horrifying digital blind spot. The massive fortune was trapped somewhere in the vast, silent void between the sending and receiving nodes. It was floating in cyberspace, completely unaccounted for. The panic started as a slow, quiet leak, and then suddenly burst the dam. The internal communication channels exploded into absolute chaos. Green status dots turned red across the entire company directory. Urgent, high-priority meeting invites began spamming every single executive inbox. Keyboards clattered furiously. The physical environment of the Viridian Hills office mirrored the digital collapse. The air conditioning felt suddenly freezing against the cold sweat breaking out on the executives' foreheads. The blinding fluorescent overhead lights seemed to pulse with the collective rising blood pressure of the room. People who had spent their entire careers hiding behind meaningless corporate buzzwords were now hyperventilating in the hallways, realizing their wealth was vaporizing by the second. Miles away, my phone began to vibrate violently on the wooden table of the cafe. I watched the glass screen light up, displaying a rapid, desperate sequence of notifications. 1 missed call, 2, 3, 4, 5 frantic missed calls from Chloe in Human Resources. Then came the text messages. 12 separate messages from the board of directors, popping up one after another in rapid succession. The tone of the texts shifted wildly, documenting their psychological collapse in real time. The first few messages were arrogant, demanding commands. Ella, minor system glitch. Need you to log in immediately and clear a routing error. 10 minutes later, the commands cracked into desperate negotiation. Ella, please pick up the phone right now. We need your access token immediately. Name your price for emergency consulting hours. We will pay anything. Then, finally, came the sheer, undisguised begging. Ella, please, I am literally begging you. Just answer the phone. Where is the money? I took another slow bite of my warm croissant. I calmly opened the settings, muted the device entirely, and flipped it face down against the table. The afternoon sun felt absolutely wonderful against my skin. Back in the sterile tech hub, the situation had devolved into a full-scale technological nightmare. The slick new development team, the ones who had mocked my strict protocols, were now sweating through their expensive designer shirts. They finally dug past the intentionally suppressed warning dashboards and ripped open the raw, unfiltered source code. What they found buried in the logs made them physically sick. The transfer command had slammed forcefully into the international payment gateway because my unique, encrypted digital signature was missing from the packet. The gateway instantly flagged the massive transaction as an unverified, anonymous bulk transfer to the automated federal oversight algorithms monitoring the wire networks. An unverified $95 million push did not look like a legitimate corporate merger. It looked exactly like a massive, illegal money laundering operation attempting to flee the country. The archaic security protocol, operating exactly as it was designed to do, had triggered an extreme defensive countermeasure. It intercepted the payload. It automatically fractured the massive sum, aggressively distributing the cash into thousands of individual, frozen holding sub-accounts directly controlled by the Federal Reserve. The money was not lost. It was locked away behind an impenetrable, labyrinthine wall of federal bureaucracy, entirely unreachable by anyone at Meridian Vault without a federal court order. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone in the boardroom rang one more time. It was the general counsel for the partner company, accompanied by a team of aggressive litigators. There was no more talk of network congestion. The message was brutal, precise, and final. If the escrow was not fully funded in 60 minutes, they were instantly canceling the multi-billion-dollar merger, walking away from the deal, and filing a massive class action lawsuit for gross negligence and breach of contract. The tech empire was collapsing in real time. The walls were rapidly closing in on Bryce. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. His breathing grew heavy and ragged. The smug arrogance completely evaporated, violently replaced by the cornered, animal panic of a man watching his golden parachute burn to ashes before his eyes. He realized he was going to lose everything. He needed a victim. He desperately needed someone to take the fall for his catastrophic, arrogant mistakes. Bryce slammed his fists onto the glass conference table, shattering a ceramic coffee mug and sending hot liquid spilling over the financial documents. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the terrified engineers cowering in the room. "She did this," he screamed, his voice cracking with wild hysteria. "Ella planted a malicious virus in the system before we fired her. It is deliberate corporate sabotage. She stole the money to ruin us. How was building his lie. He was choosing his scapegoat, and he was about to make the biggest mistake of his entirely fraudulent career. The warm Texas sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across my quiet neighborhood, when the reality of Bryce's frantic shifting of blame arrived directly at my front door. It was exactly 5:30 in the evening. I was sitting on my living room sofa, sipping a glass of water and watching the local news, when a heavy, imposing black SUV crunched aggressively onto the gravel of my driveway. It did not look like a standard corporate vehicle. Two men and one woman stepped out, wearing sharp, dark suits and grim expressions that screamed federal authority. Before they even reached the bottom step of my porch, my phone vibrated with a single, massive notification. It was a formal declaration of war from the ruthless litigation firm representing Meridian Vault. The subject line accused me of malicious corporate sabotage, grand larceny, and felony extortion. The body of the email was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. They threatened to freeze all my personal bank accounts, seize my apartment, and sue me for hundreds of millions of dollars in punitive damages. They demanded I immediately surrender the master decryption key to release the frozen funds, a key that absolutely did not exist. Then, the heavy authoritative knock echoed through my house, rattling the front door in its frame. I opened it to find two Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and a senior financial inspector from the Securities and Exchange Commission flashing their gold badges directly in my face. They were not there to ask polite questions about a minor software glitch over a cup of coffee. They were there to escort a suspected cyber terrorist into federal custody. I was instructed to step outside, and moments later, I was placed in the back of the SUV, the heavy doors locking me inside a rolling steel cage. The drive to the federal building in downtown Viridian Hills was suffocatingly silent. The agents did not speak to me, and I did not utter a single word to them. For a moment, as we drove through the fading light, anyone looking at me sitting there in the back seat might have legitimately wondered if I actually did it. Did the years of relentless corporate abuse finally break my moral compass? Did the late nights, the toxic culture, and that cruel termination message at 2 a.m. push me completely over the edge? Was I secretly a rogue architect who had meticulously siphoned away a massive fortune to teach an arrogant billionaire a brutal lesson? Federal cybercrimes carry decades in a maximum security prison. Had my quiet compliance masked a perfectly planned digital heist? The machinery of American capitalism is designed to entirely crush the individual, and right now, the entire weight of a billion-dollar corporate entity and the United States government was pressing down on my shoulders, attempting to bury me alive. I was led through a maze of sterile corridors and finally placed into a windowless, painfully bright interrogation room that smelled strongly of industrial bleach and stale coffee. The heavy metal door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the lead federal investigator and the sharp-eyed financial inspector from the SEC. There were no comfortable chairs here, just cold steel and a deeply scratched wooden table. The investigator opened a thick, heavily redacted manila folder and slid a stack of freshly printed system logs across the table toward me. These were the server access records, heavily curated, manipulated, and provided directly by the desperate executives back at Meridian Vault. The investigator pointed a thick finger at the final highlighted line of code on the paper. There it was, printed in stark black and white. My administrative username was listed as the absolute last authorized entity to touch the master routing file before the system completely locked down. To a federal agent who did not understand the deep structural decay and automated fallback protocols of our legacy code, it looked exactly like a smoking gun. It looked exactly like I had maliciously logged in, altered the destination coordinates, sealed the digital vault, and walked away with a $95 million ransom holding the entire merger hostage. Just as the lead investigator leaned in close to demand my confession, the heavy metal door swung open. Bryce walked into the room, flanked by a ruthlessly expensive corporate defense attorney who looked like a shark in a tailored suit. Bryce had completely shed his panicked, screaming persona from the glass boardroom. Now, he was playing the role of the deeply betrayed, benevolent, visionary leader. He looked at me with an expertly crafted expression of profound disappointment. shaking his head slightly to project false pity. He took a seat across from me, folding his manicured hands on the table. "Ella," he said, his voice soft, carefully modulated for the recording devices he assumed were running in the hidden walls of the room. "I do not want to see you go to a federal penitentiary for the rest of your life. We are a family at the company, and I know you were incredibly upset about the overnight restructuring. I understand you felt slighted, but this has gone way too far. If you just give us the override codes and return the money to the client right now, my legal team will drop all civil charges. We will tell these federal agents this was just a profound technical misunderstanding. I will personally forgive you. Ella, we can make all of this go away right this second, and you can walk out of that door a free woman." He sat back in his steel chair, waiting for me to break down. He expected me to cry. He expected me to panic, to frantically deny everything, or to desperately beg for a lawyer, terrified by the federal badges and the overwhelming threat of total financial and personal ruin. He truly believed his fabricated evidence and his intimidating lawyer had successfully cornered me into total submission. I looked down at the forged system logs resting on the scratched wooden table. I traced my fingers slowly over my printed username, feeling the texture of the ink on the paper. Then, I slowly lifted my head and looked directly into Bryce's eyes. I did not feel the slightest trace of fear. My pulse was perfectly steady. Instead of panic, a very faint, ice-cold smile crept onto my face. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, closing the physical distance between us. I did not ask for a phone call. I did not ask for legal representation. I just took a deep breath, ready to speak. I completely ignored the high-priced corporate defense attorney sitting across the table. I did not even look at Bryce. Instead, I turned my attention directly to the senior financial inspector from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the lead federal investigator. The air in the interrogation room was incredibly tense, heavy with the expectation of my surrender, but my voice, when I finally spoke, was perfectly steady, cold, and razor-sharp. "I do not need a lawyer, gentlemen, because there is absolutely nothing for me to defend," I stated calmly, folding my hands over the forged system logs they had placed in front of me. There was no malicious virus, there was no corporate sabotage, and nobody stole $95 million. I highly recommend you stop listening to the man sitting across from me and start looking at the actual mathematics of this situation. The lead investigator frowned, leaning forward. "You are the last authorized user on the routing file, Ella. The logs provided by your CEO confirm it. I am the last authorized user on that specific file." I corrected him, tapping the paper with my index finger. "But I want you to look very closely at the exact timestamp of when that massive transfer command was actually executed. Read it out loud, please." The Securities and Exchange Commission inspector adjusted his glasses, squinting at the dense lines of code. "The execution command was initiated at 10:15 in the morning today." I offered a small, chilling smile. "Exactly, 10:15 in the morning. Now, let me tell you what happened at 2 o'clock this morning." I reached into my bag, pulling out my personal iPad. I unlocked the screen and slid it across the scratched wooden table. Open on the display was the automated, cowardly text message I had received in the dead of night, officially terminating my employment. "As you can see by the corporate notification, my position was eliminated at 2 in the morning," I explained, my voice echoing slightly off the bare walls. "The message explicitly states that my network access would be entirely revoked at 8 o'clock this morning. I have also brought my personal home network logs from my internet service provider, securely exported and verified. They definitively prove that from the moment I left the Viridian Hills office late last night, I never established a remote connection to the company servers again. I was completely locked out of the system 2 full hours before someone inside that building manually forced the transaction through." Bryce's defense attorney immediately sat up straight, his confident demeanor slightly cracking. He opened his mouth to object, to spin another lie, but the federal investigator held up a stern hand, silencing him instantly. The inspector from the Securities and Exchange Commission was now staring intently at my iPad. Scrolling through the provided documentation, the math was flawless. The timeline was physically impossible to dispute. I could not have triggered the transfer. If you did not execute the transfer, and the money did not reach the client, where did $95 million go? The investigator asked, his tone shifting from accusatory to genuinely curious. It did not go anywhere, I replied smoothly. It is currently sitting in a highly secured, frozen holding account controlled directly by the United States Federal Reserve. Bryce's face, previously flushed with arrogant triumph, suddenly lost all its color. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of an airplane without a parachute. For the past 3 months, I continued, opening a massive, meticulously organized email folder on the iPad. I have sent dozens of urgent, documented warnings to Bryce and the executive board. You can read every single one of them right there. I repeatedly explained that our legacy routing system was dangerously outdated. I warned them that if they attempted to forcefully expedite a massive sum of money without my specific, encrypted digital risk authorization signature, the international payment gateways would instantly flag it as a severe anti-money laundering violation. The system would automatically intercept the unverified payload and surrender it to federal authorities. I paused, letting the devastating reality of my words sink into the room. Bryce knew this, I said, my gaze finally snapping over to the CEO, pinning him to his chair. But he was so desperate to inflate the company valuation before the weekend auditors arrived for the multi-billion-dollar merger, he decided to bypass federal law. When I refused to sign my name to a felony, he fired me in the middle of the night. Then, to keep the executive dashboards looking clean, he ordered the engineering team to suppress all routing error alerts. He effectively blinded his own system. When his unpaid intern hit the execution button at 10:15 this morning, the system panicked, found my signature missing, and quietly handed $95 million directly to the federal government. The corporate defense attorney was now furiously whispering into Bryce's ear, his face pale with panic, but I was not finished. I had one final, lethal blow to deliver. The state of Texas operates under a one-party consent law regarding the recording of private conversations, I announced, pulling up an audio file on the screen. As long as one person involved in the conversation consents to the recording, it is completely legal and admissible as evidence. I consented. I pressed play. The audio was incredibly crisp. The arrogant, unmistakable voice of Bryce echoed through the sterile interrogation room, recorded during a heated executive meeting exactly 1 week ago. Just ignore the safety regulations. Fire Ella if she gets in the way. We need this money to fly out to close the books. The recording clicked off, leaving an absolute, ringing silence in its wake. The illusion was completely shattered. There was no cyber terrorism. There was no grand corporate heist. There was only the staggering criminal arrogance of a silk-suited CEO who had destroyed his own empire because he fired the only person who actually knew how to steer the ship. Then, to cover his monumental stupidity, he had committed gross perjury, lied to federal agents, and filed a false report to frame an innocent woman. The shift in the room's power dynamic was instantaneous and violently tangible. The 2 federal investigators slowly lifted their eyes from the iPad and turned their heads in perfect unison to look at Bryce. The CEO was physically trembling, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The gray hue of absolute defeat washed over his face. The lead agent slowly stood up from the metal chair. He reached behind his back, his hand resting casually on the cold steel handcuffs attached to his belt. They were indeed ready to make an arrest today. But those cuffs were no longer meant for me. The fallout was spectacular, televised, and entirely brutal. Within exactly 48 hours of that tense meeting in the sterile federal interrogation room, the crisis at Meridian Vault reached critical mass. The financial press got hold of the heavily documented story, and the morning headlines were absolutely merciless. The multi-billion-dollar merger evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing but shredded contracts and a trail of furious investors in its wake. The company stock plummeted straight down to junk status before the weekend trading bell even rang. Bryce and his entire circle of yes-men on the executive board were formally indicted by the federal government for massive financial fraud. gross corporate negligence, and perjury. The shiny headquarters in Viridian Hills was swiftly surrounded by federal agents. The doors were heavily padlocked, the servers were confiscated, and the company assets were completely seized pending a criminal investigation. But the ultimate, most satisfying twist of fate revolved around that missing $95 million, because the subsequent federal investigation definitively proved that those specific funds were being illegally expedited to artificially manipulate corporate financial reports and deliberately deceive prospective buyers. The money was legally classified as illicit financial assets. The United States government officially confiscated the entire sum, permanently absorbing it into the federal treasury. However, there is a very specific, incredibly powerful piece of legislation known as the Securities and Exchange Commission Whistleblower Protection Act. Under federal law, any individual who voluntarily provides original, concrete evidence that leads to a successful regulatory action resulting in monetary sanctions exceeding $1 million is entitled to a massive reward. Specifically, the whistleblower is legally guaranteed anywhere from 10 to 30% of the total money collected by the government. Because I had meticulously documented every single violation for months, securely backed up every system log, and provided the explicit audio recording of Bryce ordering a federal felony, the Securities and Exchange Commission formally recognized me as the primary corporate whistleblower. The legal process was thorough, but undeniable. A few months later, a certified letter arrived at my front door from the United States Treasury. Inside that envelope was a perfectly legal, tax-cleared check made out to me for exactly $12 million. Today, I do not work in a windowless server room under flickering fluorescent lights. I sit in a spacious, beautifully designed corner office, overlooking the sprawling city skyline. I am the founder and absolute sole owner of my own elite corporate risk management consulting firm. Just yesterday afternoon, the senior partner of a massive Fortune 500 company walked through my heavy oak doors. He looked incredibly nervous, clutching a thick leather folder filled with complex financial routing plans. He carefully sat down across my polished desk and politely asked if I could review his new compliance infrastructure. I leaned back in my comfortable chair, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my warm artisan coffee. I looked him dead in the eye, smiled warmly, and replied, "Of course I can help you, but my consulting fees are not cheap. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my journey today. I would absolutely love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Please take a second to let me know in the comments section down below. If you found today's story compelling, I have a very important update to share with you all. As we mentioned at the beginning of this video, our channel has unfortunately lost its monetization from YouTube, which means we simply do not have the budget to keep producing content here. We will absolutely be forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform very soon. To keep these amazing stories alive, we are moving our entire operation over to Patreon. Please help support our small team by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community today. Over there, you will get immediate access to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join our new family right now by scanning the Patreon QR code displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link we have provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. We cannot wait to see you over there. And thank you once again for being such a wonderful, supportive audience.